So I'm very happy and very excited that we have the opportunity to introduce 4 excellent speakers to talk about heritage grain. Why are we growing them? What are they? What are heritage grains? And what is the relevance in our changing environment, in the climate? And how we use heritage grain to make lovely bread, whiskey, and beer. So this is a very short section. We only have 30 minutes. So the structure of the section is each speaker will have 5-6 minutes, and we don't take any questions. But at the end of this section, we'll have the tour. Just next to us is the field of heritage grain, and we can continue our conversation, and you will see the field, and you'll see why it's so important to grow heritage grain in this particular time. And in particular, we are Noam region. So this is a region farming festival, but we want to make a stake. This is no chemical whatsoever, and we do that for a reason. And we want to have a radical change for our environment, for our planet, and for our food and drink industry. So this is the lovely time to engage with everybody. And let me introduce our first speaker, John Letts.
Thank you, Marina. And thank you all for coming. It's really great to be on the stage with my friends and colleagues who are amazing people doing amazing work in their own right. And I'm sorry we have such little time, but it'll be a distillation of great ideas, which fits in with our ideas as whiskey makers. But as Marina said, it's not just about whiskey, it's about flour, it's about feeding people and doing all of that. So as 2 of my friends just said to me, John, you've never said anything in less than 5 minutes about heritage grain. So I will try, but it will be difficult. But a picture paints 1,000 words. So maybe I haven't thought it through too clearly, but we're all here because we know there's a big problem. And we have to change the way we're growing crops, particularly, and I'm interested in arable crops. I'm interested in cereals. And it's not just about how we grow them. To me, if you really want to mimic nature, as a word I hear often, and grow things in a more ecological way, you've got to get back down to the actual genetics of the crop. That's my thinking. And I think we've painted ourselves into a corner genetically by growing modern crops, monocultures. And so for 10,000 years, people grew mixed populations, genetically diverse crops that were really resilient, obviously in a period of low fossil fuels. There are implications, or no fossil fuel. There are implications for that in terms of yield. Yeah, we know all of that. But we're in a period where we have to get fossil fuel out of our production systems as fast as we can. And we've, in the last 150 years, working also as a plant breeder, we've created crops that are amazing. They're amazing inventions through plant breeding, controlling the genetics to create very pure line varieties that perform incredibly well with lots of inputs, with fossil fuel, with pesticides and herbicides and fungicides. But we just can't keep doing that. So for 25 years, I've been thinking, and 30 years actually, I'm getting really old these days, but to create crops that are similar to the crops that were grown in the past. But I think you can still use science in a very clever way to improve them. That's what I want to do. So, and my little journey starts, okay, so I'm supposed to say, so I've probably got 3 minutes now, sorry. What is heritage grain? Well, to me, it's genetically diverse populations. When I say that, I mean, some people say, oh, heritage grain is wheat with tall straw. Well, there are modern varieties that you could easily create with tall straw. Or people say and there are older varieties with short straw, and obviously it depends on how you grow it. And then others have said, well, it's pre-1960, pre-Green Revolution. Well, the Green Revolution started, one could argue, in the 1930s and only hit us in the 1980s in a breeding sense. So I'm not quite sure what the cutoff is there. But what I do know is that the early hybrids from the very early 1900s were still monocultures, and it's no different really genetically from the wheats that were grown in the 1980s. And I'm 1960, so I'm not heritage yet. Those are all modern monocultures to me. So I want to go back further than that to create a hybrid line of crop, whether that's a maize or a cereal. In a plant breeding sense, you have intensive selection to create uniformity for the characteristics you want. Then you cross them, and then they reassort themselves, and then you do more selection. You know, one plant, one seed, one crop, and you end up with uniformity. And uniformity does not give you resilience. It gives you one type of crop that in perfect conditions may do really well if you get all your applications correct, your inputs, your fertilizer. So I want to go back to the way things were done in the distant past before hybridization. So for me, that means pre-1900, thereabouts. It's kind of a vague cutoff, but basically I always say pre-hybrid. I'm not saying that early hybrid lines aren't useful in organic conditions with slightly higher nitrogen, but I want to develop crops that are very good in what I would say is very low nitrogen conditions and far lower than many organic rotational systems, in fact. And it's not just about the crop, we know that, but we'll talk about this in the field if anybody wants to come to the field afterwards about how we grow it with clover in those very low nitrogen situations. So I just to run through it, to me, this is a heritage crop. This is 3,000-year-old spelt wheat grain from an Iron Age hill fort in Somerset. It was probably a very genetically diverse landrace. I can guarantee you that's what it was. Of course, it's dead. It's just charcoal. But you can go to the gene bank and you can pull out germplasm and genetic resources and you can recreate these populations. And then every different line will have a slightly different characteristics. Some might like the heat a bit more than the others. Some might have slightly deeper rooting systems. Some might like the cold. And over time, if you grow a mixed population, those lines that are better adapted to those local conditions will produce a bit more seed. And that crop's going to evolve and adapt to those local growing conditions. And what you'll certainly have is yield stability. And I think we're all looking for that in a period of rapid climate change. And there's a lot coming down the pipeline. Things are going to get really tough. And you can't breed, in my view, well, there are two approaches. One is to try to introduce resilience and diversity into one variety, and then to multiply that into a crop, and every plant in the field is identical. But my approach would be to have a huge amount of diversity so that you have many genetic lines. I think that gives us what they used to call herd immunity. We've heard that recently. But like we're all diverse, just what we need in a crop. So if you're really going to mimic nature, you need to create that agro ecosystem in the field and below the ground, but you need to go back to crop genetic diversity. And I'll just show you this. I'm almost finished, Marina. Marina's very kind, but she can be ferocious if I speak too much. It's only a small sample. I had a sample of rye, but this is 600 years old. This is from a medieval thatched building. And that's where a lot of my journey started. I mean, I did genetics before that. But this is a landrace population that was put on a roof in 1400. And I've got stuff going back to the 1200s. It's 15th century, all over. And they were genetically diverse land races. They were populations. And they were grown without chemicals. This is the beginning of our organic farming, organic farming movement, our no-chem regen movement. So this is where I started. And I went to gene banks and I created populations, which I've been growing for 25, 30 years now. And I just want to hand you my microphone, Noam. And I just wanted to say one thing. They say size doesn't matter. I'd say it does. So that is a maslin population, a mixture of wheat and rye. In the medieval period, they called it a maslin, a mixture, which John Cherry has thank you, Noam,
I'm useful.
Who happens to be the director of the John Innes Center Gene Bank. So
we will see the field just next after they took. So you will see the real field, and it's very contrasting the lens and the tone.
Was that your very gentle way of telling me to stop talking? So give me 30 seconds, time. Okay, I just want to say that if you look at carbon sequestration or resilience or genetic diversity, I think you know which one wins. And I think there's a competition here going on between one of John's modern crops and one from the gene bank. And I think the John Innes Center has won in terms of height. A modern variety compared to that one. Now, remember, everything that happens above ground happens below ground. So you've got tall stems, you've got deep roots. So there's a whole thing going on underneath the roots as well. And this yields as much as any modern variety in an organic rotational system, that doesn't mean I necessarily want that yield. So there we are. If you want to hear any more, I've already gone over time, but I'll try to be quiet.
Thank you, John. I probably want to add one thing for the audience. The heritage grant, the notion of heritage grant was invented by John. So he is the person who invented the term, and we want to keep that integrity of the term, which is diversity, genetic diversity. And remember that is a very distinctive way to understand what heritage grants are and how we grow it and why we grow it. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Noam, who he's coming down from Norwich, from Chang in the Center Gene Bank. And we're really grateful and excited working with him and the team, Simon, to help us to make this new genetic diversity to another level. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess my role here, I'll try to be as enthusiastic. I don't know if I'll live to that, but my role here would be maybe to explain what a landrace here is, what a traditional cultivar is, how it was evolved to be, how they were evolved to be different from each other, what does it mean a population of a landrace or population of landraces. And of course we can, if you come to the field, I'm happy to answer more deeply. So as Marina said, I lead a gene bank team. I'm a senior scientist in the crop genetic department in Johnston Center. And our team is in charge of maintaining the UK landrace, the UK cereal and legume collection. We have about 55,000 accessions, so that's the inventory. And a gene bank, when you come to a gene bank, what you see is shelves and shelves and shelves of seeds. And we increase the shelf life by lowering the temperature and mainly by lowering the humidity. And so we can keep seeds for 20, 25, 30 years, but not for hundreds of years. So we need to regrow the seeds, to regenerate them. So and that's the main work of a gene bank and in this regeneration cycle. And that's what limits the numbers. But I think you can appreciate that 55,000 different accessions mean a lot of diversity. About 10 to 20,000 of them are landrace or traditional cultivars. And I met John and Marina when they explained their way of utilization of diversity. And as a gene bank, our role is dual. We need to conserve diversity for future generations and enhance its current utilization. Most of our users are scientists that learn, that study properties of the genetics, the physiology, the behavior of those plants, so that when we compare one against the other, we can learn from them, and there the diversity is very important for that. And we have about in a round of 5 years, we have 1,700 users, 1,700 projects that we support in the last 5 years. So the numbers are quite big. 70% of that roughly is scientists. The next group, 15 to 20%, is breeders that use the diversity to enhance their little high-yielding modern crops. And other users are educators, thatchers, farmers, and that's a small portion of the users. And when John and Marina came, they said that they want to diversify their populations. I said, how much? And they said, as much as possible. I said, what do you mean? So we spoke about wheat, and this is where I wanted to talk about the landrace of wheat. We have a collection of several thousand landraces of wheat. Many of them so all of them were collected before or predates the cutoff that John was talking about. And one specific collection is the Watkins collections of landrace wheat. They were collected from 32 countries around the world. It was a survey that was done through the London Board of Commerce to really sample the global diversity of wheat. And the current living collection is about 820 different landrace. And I said that we published a recent paper showing that actually all the diversity that we can measure, and I am simplifying, so I apologize for some in the audience, all the diversity that we can capture in modern diversity can be linked to 2 ancestral groups of the 7 ancestral groups that can be clustered in that collection. So 5 ancestral group, or 5 out of 7, let's say, groups of diversity, sets of diversity, are not represented in modern wheat. And that it can mean many things to many users, but one thing for sure it means that there's a lot of improvement to whatever environment or whatever properties one want to go. So what is a landrace? How did it evolve to be what it is? In the past, prior to modern globalized agriculture, there were less links between. I mean, seeds were of course shipped and traded, but they were grown in different places for different purposes, for different tastes, in different soils, with different pressures of diseases, and different community of plants around them. So they evolved with different properties. Of course, this is how the landrace diversity. This is why they are so different from each other. In addition, there was no strong selection of monoculture, so each landrace is a population. In John Innes Gene Bank, we do, because most of our users are scientists, and because scientists need repetition, we do have single seed descent of the landrace. So our main collections are stabilized landrace. They represent the global diversity, but we do it in separate. So as I said, 55,000 accessions that sample or compartmentalize this accession. But when a user wants to take all of it and put it in one pile and throw it into the field, we can do that as well, and we were very happy to attempt that challenge. And I think that would be it for me. Thank you very much. And I still have 1 minute. You can nick it.
1 minute. I'm sitting next to these guys who are preserving diversity is the future. It's the future of our agriculture in a period of massive change. So it's an honor to work with these guys, for one thing. But I was going to say that, diversity. I always say in diversity there is strength. In diversity it's resilience. But in diversity there's also flavor, and we want flavor. We're in a market where we have to sell products that taste good, that people want. So that brings us on to using that diversity, as you said, utilization in any capacity. So I just wanted to, I'll go back to Marina, but it's about flavor, whether that's of bread, whether that's of beer, whether that's of whiskey, which we do. The complexity of that flavor, the terroir of the flour, of the beer, of the whiskey, I think it's important. And it comes ultimately from the interaction of that crop with the soil, genetic diversity. It was just a lead into flavor. Sorry, Marina.
I'm going to give my 5 minutes back to John, because he just said in one sentence what I was going to take 5 minutes to say.
Can I just give 10 seconds for Noam?
Oh, no. So I was just going to say that of course, flavor is a very complex phenotype, and as scientists, we don't like complicated things, so we simplify. But we know, for example, that us, in plural, scientists. But I was going to say that we do have actually our colleagues from Rothamsted led this research. We do have evidence to show that, for example, there are more minerals and more complexities of minerals amounts in many of those landrace populations that are absent from modern wheat. So yeah.
Thank you. So now we're talking about utilization, how we use heritage grain to produce food and drinks, including pasta, beer, bread, and everything, everyday practices. How we use that genetic diversity to bring to life, to everyday life. So we want to introduce Will, who is working at Natura, and he will tell you how heritage grain is being used in the Alma bakery. Thank you.
Right, so my name is Will Dorman. I'm the UK sourcing manager at Natura. The first thing I want to do is just thank John and Marina for the opportunity. I've been a bright-eyed attendee here many years, and to be up on the stage is really a pleasure. So I just want to share that gratitude, because it's really lovely to be here. And also, if you're sitting out there, I mean, we're really fundamentally here to inspire one another and to work together. There's this incredible crisis out there that we're all trying to find ways to build bridges to confront and look for solutions. So if you're sitting out there wondering what can you do, just keep doing what you're doing, keep trying to make progress, and one day you might find yourself up here, you know? So I really mean that. It's genuinely a pleasure to be up here. Thank you. So I work at Natura. We are fundamentally a fruit and veg company. That is what you would tell somebody who maybe didn't know us or maybe wasn't here with a little bit more understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. Fundamentally, we exist to transform the food system. The idea there, which it feels really silly explaining to all of you, is that we're all consuming within an industrialized food system where yield and uniformity and shelf life and things that have no relationship to flavor or nutrition or human health, and by extension have absolutely no relation to soil health or to the environment, are what we are being given as options in terms of the types of foods that we can consume. We exist to do things differently. We try to put an end to opaque supply chains where products are traveling long distance, going through many, many different hands, and then by the end, it's impossible to know where it came from or who it came from. You go into Tesco and there's a name of a farmer. I've been to many of those farms. I'm sorry, I've named someone. I don't want to criticize anyone. That's the business owner. It's often not the farmer. The farmer is someone else. There's all kinds of things that happen in the industrialized food system. People are trying to feed people, and I understand that. We're trying to give people an option to pick something else, right? So for me, it's all about leading with flavor. It's everything that John just said, right? Flavor for me fundamentally comes from diversity. I'll give you guys an example. I know we want to talk about grain, so just to at least not to be remiss, we are fortunate at Natura, aside from the fruits and vegetables that we sell, primarily into restaurants in central London, but also as a home delivery service into customers in London and outside of London, 8 different varieties of courgette and 12 different kinds of citrus, and a real focus on genetic diversity, on varietal diversity, on cultural practices, selling things like Yorkshire forced rhubarb, things that people were going to give up on because there weren't enough people who were willing to pay for them, willing to give an incentive to preserve these beautiful varieties, these beautiful cultural practices. You know, this year, I don't know if you guys have tried to go out and find English garden peas, but almost every farmer has packed up trying to farm English garden peas for thank you, acknowledged, for a number of different reasons, you know? And it's things like this. They're known all around the world as English garden peas. And I go around as the UK sourcing manager and I can't find anybody growing peas, right? It's because the supermarkets don't want to sell fresh peas in a pod because it's just a trouble for them. It's a problem. So at Alma, we don't see things like that as a problem, right? At the bakery, our goal is to buy, and we have from the very beginning worked with heritage grain from John. We buy that grain in whole, and then we stone mill it ourselves on an new American stone mill. That grain, that flour is then used fresh. It's fermented overnight in a long fermentation process, and we make bread and a few pastries. And we sell that bread and pastries at scale into restaurants in central London and in through our shops and other things like that. And so I think as much as flavor is diversity, we need a diversity of solutions in terms of how we go forward with things like heritage grain, different scales, different levels of supply chain and things like that. So there are so many wonderful bakeries out there, and I could name so many that are that have one shop that are selling a great number of loaves to a few local customers. And we need loads of bakeries like that. And I also feel like at this stage, we need someone like Natura who has the supply chain and the ability to deliver bread at scale to be able to produce enough volume that we can be getting heritage grain into the hands of many people as possible without sacrificing on the flour that's actually going into the bread, right? So for me, that's what it really comes down to. Those of you who are lucky enough to have a bag of flour here, this flour was just milled yesterday. It's 100% John's grain. It was milled in Bermondsey, where we have our stone mill. I say lucky enough because getting John's grain is not always easy. Yeah. And so you have a real treasure there that you can take with you. And I would also say that one of the beautiful initiatives that we have at Natura, one of the things that scalability and the ability to reach lots of customers offers us is to be able to have initiatives like our Farm Fund. So the Farm Fund is a charitable initiative, a grant-giving initiative that we set up where many of the activities that our brand puts on, or the collaboration that you see here with Momo, where we've given them watermelon juice from our beautiful watermelon farmer in Italy, where they've made this seasonal kombucha that's been passed around that's delicious. The proceeds from this, of each bottle, are going to the Farm Fund. We have a stand over there at Alma called Alma, which is the bakery where you can come and buy bread. 100% of the proceeds from that are going to the Farm Fund. And the Farm Fund, acknowledged, thank you, is not an initiative where we're paying loads of Natura salaries. 100% of the money raised in the Farm Fund goes directly to growers. And just this year, just last week, 6 growers were given grant money. And this past year, we raised £50,000 to give to farmers under the age of 35 trying to make some kind of investment in agroecological infrastructure or an agroecological farming project, because we need, like, you guys have heard it. What's the average age of a farmer in the UK now? 67, 68. People are telling their children not to do it. Like, we need to restore dignity in farming. We need to, it's not me, but and I think that's really one of the most important things. I guess the last thing I want to acknowledge, the last thing I want to leave everybody with is just this. There's a lovely Wendell Berry quote for me that's really important, and it comes down to what I think we're all really here to do. And he says, there are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places. And I would challenge all of you to take that with you as you leave here today, and try and remember that it's on each of us, as much as we can, to try and bring conscious awareness into the ways in which we consume and the ways in which we treat the people around us, and that we find ways to work together to get out of this mess. So thank you.
Thank you. No. Well, the next speaker is Colin Johnston, and he is the head of marketing in Chris Malt. And I just want to add one thing. Field and Whiskey, where I'm working now, is a mission-led company. And the mission is transform agriculture in the grain sector. And we really want to transform the grain production in the lowest input possible way to grow grains, heritage grain, in a sustainable, long-term sustainability. And personally, actually, this is a very progressive company because I don't drink. I don't drink at all, but they hire me to do research. So I think that is a very important message to say, you don't have to drink, but drinking is, the alcohol is part of our everyday life, and how we use that market and industry to transform our farming system. Colin.
Okay, I don't know how I'm going to follow a quote like that. That was fantastic. So my name's Colin Johnston. I'm Sales and Marketing Director at Crisp Malt. And I think when it comes to beer and whiskey production, the maltster is a bit of the chain that's kind of forgotten. And many people in the room might not even know what we do. So I'll explain very briefly about what malt is, what we do, what we've been doing for the past 150 years, and the shift that I now see in the malting industry that's going to accelerate as we move towards these more regenerative systems. But I think, first of all, I've got to talk about flavour, because it's always got to come back to flavour. I'm a huge beer and whiskey enthusiast, and when I started going around distilleries in Scotland, once I was of that age, pretty much every distillery I walked into, there's this old adage in the Scottish whiskey industry. They say that the flavour comes from the wood, comes from the barrel. And I've heard this so many times over the years. And when I started to get into the malt industry, and I've been working in malt for about 8 years and 7 years prior to that in the brewing industry, I knew from the brewing industry that grain, malt has such a massive impact on flavour, and yet I didn't hear that in the whiskey industry. And so the expression that I like to say now is that the flavour will come from the barrel, but only if you let it. If you actually introduce diversity and interesting varieties, you can bring flavour from the grain, flavour from the malts. And Fielden are trailblazing in this area because they're bringing the flavour from the grain. Why is it that Crisp are interested in flavour and grain? So we as a business have been around for over 150 years. We're based in North Norfolk. So we were started by two brothers, Frederick and George Smith, in 1870, and they recognized that there was fantastic grain growing in the local area, and they recognized that there was a solid family business could be built on the back of that grain, and they started malting at Great Ryborough, a small village in North Norfolk. That's still our main site, and it's still where we have our traditional 1870s floor malting as well. There's only 3 left in England doing this very traditional technique of floor malting. I won't lie, it's less than 1% of what we do. We are a large industrial scale maltster as well. We're supplying somewhere in the region of 210,000 tonnes to the brewing and the whiskey industry within the UK. And the vast majority of that grain that we are malting is of a small handful of varieties. And when you look at this small handful of varieties, there's really very little difference in terms of the flavour. But when we start to look at the heritage grains, we start to see that through this genetic diversity, we get flavor. How did we start on our journey? Well, it was through the John Innes Centre, actually, because we got in tow with one of the John Innes researchers, Chris Ridout, who was looking at a specific land race called Chevalier, which was kind of the granddaddy of all malting barley varieties in the UK from the 1820s. And Chris was looking at it because he was interested to see if old land race genetics had resistance to modern diseases. He was specifically looking at fusarium resistance. And they grew a very, very small crop from the John Innes Centre germplasm. And then he, as a lover of beer, he went, I wonder what that is going to taste like. So he approached us, and on our traditional floor maltings, we malted a couple of 100 kilos. There was a tiny amount of grain on a small bit of stone floor, and then we fired it, and then we brewed a beer with it. And we went, wow, this tastes so different to all these modern varieties. So what is it about that? Why does it taste different? And it really sparked our interest. So since then, over the past 10 years, we started what we call our Heritage Grain Program, which I might have to change, having heard John's definition. We've had some discussions over this over the years. But we now have this landrace variety, this Chevalier, that we've brought back from the dead, and we sell to brewers and distillers all over the world. And every time they brew a beer with it and a whiskey with it, they go, wow, that is distinct to all the other modern varieties. We've done the same with an original Czech Moravian landrace called Hanna, which for every modern lager variety of barley can trace its lineage back up to Hanna, which came from the Hanna Valley in Czech Moravia. And the very first Pilsner lagers were brewed with this Hanna. And again, when you brew a beer with it, or indeed people are using it for whiskey as well, you go, wow, there's this incredible difference in flavor. And what we're starting to see with people like Fielden and other distillers and brewers around the world, they are willing to pay the price, and I think consumers are also starting to pay the price as well for this diversity and flavor that comes from grain. I didn't actually explain what malting is in very, very, very short, succinct expression. We take live grain that's been dried from the field, we soak it in water, and we affect this biotransformation within the grain, where we're releasing starch and enzymes that a brewer or a distiller can then use to make beer and whiskey. That's the most succinct version of malting that I can do. But I think, what these guys are doing, everyone on the panel is doing, is hugely important, because it is through this diversity that we're going to see resilience, but also, as a lover of beer and whiskey, not only do we get resilience, we get amazing products and amazing flavor as well.
Thank you. So, thank you, everybody, all the speakers. And as you said, we don't take questions, but we have the opportunity to walk in the field, and we can interact, we can have a conversation. And also, we have a tent, a field and tent in G31. And tomorrow we also have another tour. So if you want to see all the activities, what we're running, and you are able to come and take it. And before we wrap up this section, I want to emphasize this we said no-chem region and for grain production, and how we're able to do it in a sustainable way, economically, ecologically, and socially. And we need to think about very innovative and radical solutions. And we need you, every one of you, to join our grain revolution, the genuine grain revolution that will help us to get out of this mess. And welcome you and join us. Thank you.